Okay, so again, welcome to the presentation for exploring the story behind the making of this beautiful movie, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. There's a long and rich story behind the movie. So I will be going more into the story because it's so beautiful. And if you have any questions about specifically about something that you see in the movie and you want to know about how it was made, and if I have not addressed it already, we can always have a Q&A. I usually don't have Q&As after the presentation. I like to keep it interactive. So if at any point of time, if you guys have any questions, just stop me. And I don't get disturbed by being stopped in the middle of saying something. So I can just pick it up again and start talking. Okay. So this is very groundbreaking, very monumental film, very great importance in the history of animation filmmaking. As I will explore how this movie came to be, we will realize that in the history, the presence of this movie has affected literally everything that everybody was and is doing in animation at the time until now. Okay, so what happened is, I want to start by talking about the maker of the film. This particular genius is named Hayao Miyazaki, and he is basically credited as the sole creator, conceptualizer, writer, illustrator, and everything has come from his brilliant mind. Of course, you cannot make a movie alone. So he has collaborated with many people. I'll talk about those people in a minute. But the sole credit of this movie's existence goes to him, and his vision and the circumstances that he found himself in, and how he coped with those circumstances, how he conquered the struggles that he came across, and eventually went on to make this movie. Please remember that as respected as he is, he was also known to be very short-tempered and very childlike in his tantrums, and he used to come across as very petty at times. But the words that would come out of his mouth, the knowledge that he would share, the way he looked at the world around himself and interpreted it and said it out loud or wrote about it or drew about it, affected so many lives that they looked beyond his childish behavior to recognize him as a living legend. As opposed to what happened with Vincent van Gogh, he was recognized as a legend after his death. As long as he was alive, he was considered to be very, so two artists, one in the field of visual arts and one in the field of animation, who were very childish, but have similar aptitudes, but had very different stories. That is why Vincent van Gogh's story is considered to be a tragedy, whereas Hayao Miyazaki's story is considered to be a success story, where art has succeeded over all the hurdles that came in the way. So getting into a little bit about him, he was born on January 5th, 1941, and is recognized today as a Japanese animator, director, producer, screenwriter, author, and a manga artist. So he's all those things rolled into one guy. He co-founded the studio, today worldwide recognized as one of the most celebrated studios, Studio Ghibli, and he attained international acclaim as a masterful storyteller and creator of Japanese animated feature films, and is widely regarded as one of the most accomplished filmmakers in the history of animation. So we, the people who work in the field of animation, we lovingly call him the Akira Kurosawa of animation. He has attained that respect, that level of respect, just a different medium, but it is ultimately filmmaking. Okay, so that's about Hayao Miyazaki. Now, this is where the actual story of how this came about comes. Once we know about the director, we will address how the movie, what led to the creation of this movie. In short, I would say that the story is that he created this manga in the year 1982, and in the year 1984, based on this manga, he created the movie Nausicaa. So the manga was translated into a film. Technically, how this happens is that he wrote the story of the manga. He illustrated everything from page 1, from the covers to the pages to everything. The panels, everything he did on his own as a manga artist. So he's basically a trained illustrator. And he wrote this manga over a period of almost 12 years. So he started writing this manga in 1982, and the manga concluded in 1994. And it was serialized in a Japanese publication by the name Animage. Okay. And the movie, so ultimately he ended up writing 27 comic books, which were later compiled into 7 volumes. So these comic books came, I don't know if any of you know about, earlier we used to get these magazines in which one page would be a comic right near the end. So I remember growing up with magazines which had Hergé's Tintin or Asterix, or sometimes there was these American comics called Archies. We would get one page of those comics at near the final few pages of the magazine, and just like that, this was written as a comic strip over 12 years, and it's called serialized in a magazine. That is the technical term. Yes.
The same story?
No. So it's I mean, it's Nausicaa's story, her different adventures. So what you see in the movie are the first 16 chapters. So it's not the entire 27 comic books, just the first 16 chapters were translated into the movie. The story synopsis is, it tells the story of Nausicaa, a princess of a small kingdom on a post-apocalyptic Earth with a toxic ecosystem, who becomes involved in a war between kingdoms while an environmental disaster threatens humankind. So this was the story synopsis. This was the idea which was then told through the length of the manga. Okay, so but this is not where Miyazaki's career started. Miyazaki was an illustrator, and he used to work as a comic book artist for many publications, and then eventually he translated to working as a trainee animator with a few Japanese animation studios, and he rose from being a trained animator to something called an in-between animator. These are technical terms. If you want, I can explain them. But it's the term is an in-betweener. So what do you want me to explain it? Okay. So in animation, when we are creating animation, we have this thing called keyframes. So whenever we are moving a character or any object, the keyframes are the positions in which whatever action is undergoing changes. So I'll give you a simple example. If I'm moving my hand like this is an animation. So a key animator would create this frame, and this frame. And these frames become the key frames. And then there is another artist who will come in and make the in-between frames, because you cannot do animation with 3 frames. you need to have 24 frames per second of animation. So that artist who is doing the in-between drawings is known as the in-betweener. Okay, and he worked as that. And then eventually he became a keyframe animator, and it led to him working with his future collaborator, Isao Takahata, who was at that time, when he was working as a junior animator and an in-betweener, an established director. So Isao Takahata was already an established animation director in Japan, and Miyazaki got to know him by working as an artist for his movies. He obviously, Isao Takahata was an amazing talent, and he is, in my opinion, a very underrated director. In some cases, I like his movies way more than Miyazaki's movies. A couple of movies that he has made are, I find, way better than, I mean, in my personal opinion, are more dear to me than even the best Miyazaki films. And Miyazaki learned a lot from him. But Miyazaki rose to the level that he is known for today because of his own talent. So Miyazaki was hugely talented and very, very in touch with the surroundings. And we will talk about why and how, what all things happened in his life that led to him becoming so aware of his surroundings. So during this time, while he was working with Isao Takahata, eventually rose to the position of director, and his feature film debut was an animated film called Lupin the Third, The Castle of Cagliostro, or Cagliostro, in which case G is silent. I don't know which one is the correct pronunciation. I found that it is said in both ways. Silent G. So Lupin, because in a lot of interviews people call it Cagliostro, and a lot of other interviews people are calling it Cagliostro. So I think it's an Italian word or Spanish. Yeah, one of those. Sounds Italian. So Lupin the Third, The Castle of Cagliostro, and this movie was released in 1979. Okay, so this is way before his 1982 manga. So he also, sorry, yeah, oh, okay. While he was doing this movie, this is his debut movie, but he did this for some animation studio in Japan. He was only involved in the movie as a director. So he didn't write the script, he didn't do the conceptualization, he was just brought in to direct the film. And that film is a property of the animation studio that he was working with to do that. Now eventually, what happened is, one of the producers on that film recognized him as not being just a director, because he got to work with him, he got to see him drawing and painting and writing stories, and he got after him to write something that this producer, and his name is Toshio Suzuki, who recognized his talent, and he said, you need to write something that I can give to the financiers and make into a movie, because I love the way you think, I love the way you write, I love the way you draw. And he was instrumental in getting Miyazaki the finances that were required to make his movies. Because Miyazaki was not known to be an idea man till this time. He was just known to be a very creative person, but coming up with ideas and making them into tangible content, he was not known for yet. So when Toshio Suzuki asked him to write something, he wrote this manga. And with that script, he wrote the story of this manga. So he didn't illustrate the manga, he just wrote the story. And with that, he went to the financiers, and they immediately shooed him away. They said, you are saying that we have to make a movie from an individual who is not known, and from a story which is not known, which is not already an IP, and about environmentalism, and all those things that made this movie unique. They said, we don't want to make a movie on this because we know that we cannot make money on it. And they said, that one of the reasons that we cannot make it is because it's not an existing IP. So the IP is intellectual property. Sorry. So the culture in Japan at that time was that people used to invest in making movies of existing content in manga. So they used to take existing popular manga and make animation out of that. And this did not have that. It just had a written script. So he was shooed away. So he came back to Miyazaki and he said that we cannot make it into a movie because there's no manga on it. So Miyazaki said, well, I can make it. And that's how he ended up not only writing, but also illustrating the manga. So what I'm going to do is, in the next few slides, I will just show you a few panels of the manga to you so that you get an idea about how it looked at the time. So this is one of the panels, and if you've seen the movie, you can see where all the style and everything came from.
It's pretty much like a storyboard.
Yes, yeah. The manga was pretty much. In so many frames, you will see the exact frame from the manga translated to the movie.
The manga was in black and white?
Yes, manga was only illustration. They used to, because at that time manga was only released with a colored cover, front and back, but everything inside used to be just black and white. So this is some slides of the original manga. Okay, so now we come to the point where I'm going to talk about where he got the idea from. So we have spoken that he had the idea, he wrote it in the script, got thrown away, he translated it into a manga, and so what happened is when he went back with the manga, Toshio Suzuki got the financials. They were amazed by the visuals, the financials, and they gave the green light to make the movie. Okay, so that story went on, and we got the movie after that. Now this is the story about, in these slides, I'm going to talk about what happened and what Miyazaki went through to reach that state of mind where he could write such a story. Okay, so Miyazaki was, as we know, born in 1941, and everybody knows what happens 4 years later. Yeah. So, yeah, it's in our dark history. The bombing of the two Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Let me say that again: the atomic bombing of these two cities, and he basically grew up in post-bombing Japan. Okay, so he has in many interviews talked about as he was growing up, planes flying in the sky. Yeah, and you see those translated, and not only this movie, many movies. He has this idea of creating insects with wings. They are flying, but the wings are not flapping. This imagery is very unique to Miyazaki's style, that you will have insects which are flying, but the wings are not flapping. And this imagery is created from planes whose wings don't flap. So that affected him very badly. And he grew up, if you see movies like Kiki's Delivery Service or even Spirited Away, there are imageries of bombing from the sky over cities. And he said that I saw my neighborhood being blown up in front of my eyes as he was growing. And what happened after this was, so historically, when Japan was bombed and the war ended, Japan got many sanctions, meaning restrictions on what they could do as a nation after. So they could not militarize, they could not create weapons, they had many restrictions. So Japan had to literally restart their entire economic system. They had to restart their entire cultural system. They had to restart their entire social system. And one of the major things that happened during that time is an industrial revolution. So Japan underwent a major Western influenced industrial revolution from the 1950s to the 1970s. So you can imagine this is the period that Miyazaki is growing up and became a young man in this era. So he saw all this happening in front of his eyes. Japan going from a completely devastated, surrendered country, which is being big bossed by the Western countries and being told what to do and what not to do, to undergoing this major industrial revolution, which basically brought in a lot of investments in the field of the industries of electric power, the industry of coal, and the industry of steel manufacturing. So these are the three major industries that got boom in Japan, and huge investments were pulled into this for the creation of these industries. And as we all know, when you put so much into these industries, you get pollution. So as these industries are going, the pollution in Japan started multiplying. I mean, tenfolds because of the industrial waste. So Miyazaki grew up watching all this happening. And then so now this is what happened to him. And now we move ahead to the point where he was approached by Toshio Suzuki to tell the story. He found that this was his opportunity to express his concerns about the environmental calamities that he could foresee happening because of what is happening in Japan all around him. This led to him writing the book, and as the book was made into manga because of all the shenanigans that happened behind the corporate walls, he ended up making this beautiful manga. So this is where the line comes in, which I have put in there. Nausicaa is essentially Miyazaki's response to a changing world and an uncaring society. So these words are reflected in the movie in many, many subtle or very, very in-the-face ways. Okay. Now, coming to the influences on the style and the storytelling. One of the influences of that influenced Miyazaki a lot was one of the stories that his mother used to read to him when he was a child. And this is a period in Japan's history called the Heian period, in which this tale was written, and it's called The Lady Who Loved Insects. So this book was one of the influences, and the character has shown character traits that she can interact with insects, she loves them, she understands them, she can communicate with them. There's some unknown way, because of unknown talent that she has, that she's able to communicate with. These are all the things which are in the manga and in the movie. So those characteristics of the character come from the characteristics of this particular lady. The second influence was the name. The name was derived from a similarly named character in Homer's Odyssey. So this is the lady, and her name is Nausicaa. This is the very name of this character in Homer's Odyssey. So this is Greek mythology. And this lady was known to help people a lot. She was known to have a lot of empathy. She was known to be very kind, very generous, even though she was a rich princess. The culture was not to be generous, but she was the rebel, and behind the back of the royalties, she would help people. And the scene that you're seeing here played out is the scene where this character, who is now, I have not studied Homer's Odyssey, so I can only tell you, I won't be able to answer your questions about this if you have any. He is a character by the name Odysseus, and he has basically been shipwrecked and washed upon this island. And this island is inhabited by this community which does not take kindly to strays. Because of whatever happened to them in their history, they, without asking questions, they kill the strays. So when he came about, and by his luck, he met her first, she prompted him to go and meet the queen and showed him the way that he can secretly go and meet the queen and present his case in front of her, and she will influence the king so that he is not immediately murdered the moment people find out that he is on the island. So that's the little bit of the story that I picked up about the person on which the name was used. So he took that name because of the characteristics of and behavior of this, because he felt that his character was similar to them, and Nausicaa seemed to be a very nice name to him. And then the final thing was this very, very devastating industrial spill which happened in the Minamata Bay. So there is a Minamata river which comes, and there is a bay, and there was a mercury factory which had a major spill into the bay, and this led to the same level of deformations and human suffering that the atomic bomb did. So I have the imagery, I found the imagery, but I was scared to put all those photos in here because there are also children. I knew that Julian's children might be here, so I have not put in the imagery, but it led to great tragedy in this area because of the mercury pollution. So this particular incident is known as the Minamata Bay mercury pollution. This was the incident that affected Miyazaki tremendously. And this was one of the that he in many interviews has said was one of the inspirations for him to write the story. Because as I said earlier, he got the opportunity. When he got the opportunity to write it, he took it as the chance for him to share his concerns because of all these things happening in Japan. And this is one of the results, this factory was one of the results of the Industrial Revolution. Now, the last thing when it comes to influences is this gentleman. Anybody knows who this is? Yes? Anybody knows who this is? Okay.
Blueberry?
Yes, it is Blueberry. Yes. This is Blueberry, but anybody knows who that is? He is the creator of Blueberry, so writer, illustrator. And he is a very world-renowned French comic book artist who goes by the name Mobius. Okay? And his real name is Jean Giraud. So there is Jean, Jean, and Giraud. Am I saying it right?
Jean Giraud.
Okay. So the D is silent then. Jean Giraud. And his illustrations were a great influence on Miyazaki, and you can see the influence in Miyazaki's drawings. If you want to find out, you'll have to find the Blueberry series, and then Miyazaki himself has confessed that he was.
Did you find any direct influence with La Planète Interdite?
No, but they might be.
Indirect, most probably. But
No.
direct.
In all the research I did, that name never came up, other than once. And I have that reference in my presentation. This is, you're talking about the Fantastic Planet, right?
Yeah.
La Planète Savage.
La Planète Sauvage, pardon.
Yeah, La Planète Sauvage. That's the movie you're talking about, right?
Yeah, that we showed a few months ago.
Yeah. It is in the story, but it is not been told as one of the influences. Okay. So now what happened is, so these are all the influences, and these influences led to the, I already told the story about how the conception of the manga, which led to the conception of the movie. Now we'll talk about how the manga became a movie a little later, but right now I want to talk about this thing. Okay, so Nausicaa is the biggest reason that Studio Ghibli exists. Okay, Nausicaa happened, so Studio Ghibli happened. So what happened here is that, again, I'll take a few story beats again. The first thing happened, Isao Takahata has so much influence on Miyazaki, I just keep going to his name, but little known producer. And this is something that is very funny. In most of the documentaries and most of the photos of Miyazaki, Toshio Suzuki is in the frame. So it becomes very funny that why is this guy with Miyazaki everywhere, whether he's having coffee, whether he's walking on the streets, whether he's making any film, there is any presentation, this guy is always behind him. He's always there. And then when I actually did the research in that name kept coming again and again. So you have to understand, Toshio Suzuki is the reason that Miyazaki came in the limelight, because he recognized his talent. Okay, so I will keep referring to him again and again, because I want people to know the importance of this guy in Miyazaki's life. Okay, so Toshio Suzuki got him to write the script, got him to make the manga, and the manga was for this magazine, the pages of this magazine, which was eventually compiled into 7 volumes as a graphic novel. And then one important story beat here is that when Miyazaki was making this manga, he agreed to make the illustrated part of it only if it is never made into a movie. He said, I'm ready to do this, because Toshio Suzuki came to him and said, if you want to make a movie out of it, we need to have a manga. But Miyazaki said, I don't want to make a manga with this in my head that someday it will be a movie. I want to make the manga with the condition that it will never be made into a movie. And he said, I want to put all my energy into making this manga without thinking behind my back that I'm going to make a movie out of this someday. So no movie, only manga. And Toshio Suzuki was happy with it, because he was actually, before he became a producer for films, he was one of the producers of this Animage magazine. And Hayao Miyazaki used to do illustrations for that magazine. That's how he recognized him. And then when this came out, it was serialized in the magazine. So when this became a property and he had enough content in the magazine to show to the financiers, he went to them again that now we have a manga and we want to make a movie, and this agreed to it. And he came back to Miyazaki, he said, no, I'm not going to make a movie. But this guy kept persisting. He went to them, he said, I need more budget. The director, he was playing game on both the sides. And he went to them and, no, the director is not ready to direct it because the budget you have given is not enough. So we need more budget. So he got him more budget. And then this back and forth, and eventually it reached a point where Hayao Miyazaki got so much budget that he just could not say no. So at one point in time, Miyazaki said, okay, I will give you permission to make this into a movie, but only under one condition. I will direct it. And then again it became a problem, because they wanted established directors. The financiers didn't want to let Hayao, who is he? So then Toshio Suzuki again rallied with Lupin the Third. Oh, he's made this movie, it was a big commercial success, blah, 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 blah. With his talent of animation combined with what he has shown in the manga, his talent of storytelling and his visuals and his themes and his connection with the environment and all those things, I think so Toshio Suzuki really rallied for him and eventually convinced the financiers to let him make the movie. And that's how it ended up in the creation. So just like he wrote, illustrated and illustrated the manga, he did all the concept design and directed the film. So then when he was asked to direct the film, he obviously could not keep writing the manga and directing the film. So he took leave from publication, and Toshio Suzuki and Isao Takahata got together, and they decided that we want to make it into an animation film. And they started hunting for artists. And then it became a point that they could not get enough of good artists and whatnot. And then they decided that, okay, it is not possible for us to do it ourselves, and we don't have the budget to set up a studio, so we will work with some other studio. And that's when they worked with this Tokyo-based studio called Topcraft. So Topcraft is the animation studio which made Nausicaa. Nausicaa comes out in 1984, becomes a phenomenon, huge success, critical acclaim, commercial success. People are lining up outside theaters. There are archival footage of like they have for Star Wars, no? People lining up. They have for Nausicaa also. Archival footage of people lining up across blocks to see the movie, and big hit. And at that time, these three guys again came out of Topcraft. Topcraft went bankrupt, and did. So the producers took all the money, and the animation studio didn't get any money. It became bankrupt in the production of Nausicaa, and these guys again got budget and bought Topcraft and renamed it into Studio Ghibli, and these three were the co-founders. So Hayao Miyazaki, Toshio Suzuki, and Isao Takahata became the co-founders of Studio Ghibli.
Yes, sir.
But how come the studio was bankrupt with such a success?
Yes, because when the studio only gets the money for creating the artwork, the producers take away all the money that the movie gets in the box office. This is the same thing that happened with Life of Pi. Do you know this movie, Life of Pi? It's a visual effects movie in which, yes, the studio that made all the visual effects of that movie, including the tiger and the whale and the meerkat and everything, its name is Rhythm and Hues, that went bankrupt after the movie, and the movie won an Oscar, and big commercial success. So there is a little disparity in the media industry, where the actual artist actually doesn't get paid. I mean, if I get into the actual salaries of artists, it'll take me another 2 hours. So the long story short is that in the making of Nausicaa, Topcraft went bankrupt, and the movie the financiers got a lot of profit, and then they said that we are going to finance you guys. We are not going to finance Topcraft, and you make a studio. And these guys were very happy to do that, because then they had complete control, because they became the founders. Topcraft was another other people's studio, so they had to collaborate. So in this case, they came out and they chose this name, Studio Ghibli. Now yesterday I had a long chat after the movie with a couple who were very insistent on the pronunciation of the name of the studio. Do you have any idea about what Ghibli means, or where it comes from, or what is the right pronunciation?
Ghibli.
Okay. Huh?
Ghibli probably.
Ghibli, yes. But yes and no. Okay, so yeah, so it is an Italian word, and it literally translates to hot wind of the desert. Okay, and it is the correct pronunciation of this word is Ghibli. When Miyazaki came across this word, in his Japanese sensibilities, because in Japanese, GHI is not Gi, is G. Miyazaki thought that it is pronounced as Ghibli. And they got together and they named the studio. And when the name actually came out, there was a lot of, I don't want to say negative talkback, but his choice of word pronunciation of the word was questioned. And Toshio Suzuki went with this information to him that we are pronouncing the name wrong. And Miyazaki said, but we are a Japanese studio. We will pronounce it the way Japanese people would pronounce this. We will not pronounce it the way Italian people pronounce it. So there's a bit of a, back and forth that happened between them. And Toshio was that, oh no, this is not authentic. The authentic word is Italian. You can't take copyright on Italian words and say that I'm Japanese. So he said, I don't care. This is my studio. I'm calling it Ghibli. Italian people want to call it Ghibli, let them call it Ghibli. There was something where the word Ghibli, similar sounding word in Japanese, is a very, like, if you want to say that something is pathetic, they say Ghibli or something like that. I don't know what the actual word is, but a similar sounding word. So he didn't want his studio's name to sound pathetic. And he was so taken by the sound of Ghibli and what it actually means that he said, no, I'm going to call it Ghibli. And in history, let it be known that Miyazaki calls it Ghibli. Now you do with that information what you want to do. So the studio, according to Japanese culture, is Studio Ghibli. And then anybody can call it, the founders of this studio call it Studio Ghibli, and people can call it whatever they want to. So there is no dispute here. Everybody is free to call it whatever they want to. Okay. And of course, Studio Ghibli went on to make many animated films directed by Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. Few of his movies are my favorite. So the first movie was this one, Castle in the Sky. And after that, the movie is not here. There was a movie called Grave of the Fireflies. Yeah, so I was saying that Miyazaki himself made many movies. Some other directors made many movies. Isao Takahata made many movies. His first movie was Grave of the Fireflies. His last movie, before he died in 2015, was The Tale of Princess Kaguya, another movie which is very dear to me. And I don't want to undermine either of the directors. At some point in time, Miyazaki's son, Goro Miyazaki, also made movies for Studio Ghibli. And they are at this moment recognized as one of the most premier animation studios, easily rivaling the success of Disney or DreamWorks or any Pixar or any other movie. They are predominantly hand-drawn 2D animation movies. They tried to do one 3D animation movie in collaboration with a 3D animation studio, and it was a big disaster. I don't think that movie even saw the light of the day, but it is in the history books that they did try to make a 3D animated movie. A big disaster. It just, the storytelling just didn't translate into 3D, so they have stuck to 2D. Any questions? Too much information? One is getting bored here. I hope not. Anyways, it's very interesting. I mean, all this information I found out was crazy. And okay, so then this happened, and eventually the studio and Miyazaki went on to win an Oscar for Spirited Away in 2003. And this, of course, brings worldwide recognition. There is another way that they got worldwide recognition, which was not a very good thing, which I'll talk about a little later. But this was the good way that they got worldwide recognition. And it opened up, winning an Oscar opened up Japanese animation to the worldwide.
Which Oscar?
Spirited Away.
So it's for which?
Best animated feature film. Yeah. Okay. Now we come to the actual movie. Finally. Now we start talking about the movie. I did say story behind the making of this movie. There's a long story. Nausicaa is a 1984 Japanese anime film written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki, based on his 1982 manga. It was produced by Tokyo-based animation studio Topcraft. I will talk about the next person I'm going to mention. I'll talk about him a little later. Joe Hisaishi. Yes. Is in his first collaboration with Miyazaki, composed the score. Joe Hisaishi is a composer, and he composed the score for all the scenes in the movie. The movie is an adaptation of the first 16 chapters of the manga series. So that's the information about the movie. I have added one line there, which I will just mention now, but explore a little later. The movie was re-released on physical media in 2005 by Walt Disney Studios. And there's a lot to talk about there before we come to that, but I want to talk about a few other things before we reach there. The movie in 1984 was only released in Japan. Okay, and then a lot of things happened before it was released on physical media in 2005 by Walt Disney, which I will talk about. Yeah. Now, regarding the movie, I want to just once go over the story beats, and then we will talk about other things. Okay, just so that we are all on the same page. Okay, so the story starts 1,000 years after the world ended in an apocalyptic event called the 7 Days of Fire. The world faces new dangers. An ever-growing toxic jungle is filled with dangerous spores, and we find our princess, our central character, rummaging through this toxic forest fearlessly. Okay, this is how we find her. She's not afraid of the environment. She's not afraid of the insects. She's not afraid of the spores. These spores are death-inducing within minutes, but she is not afraid of them. And this is something that we'll explore later as to why. So it says that faces new dangers. The ever-growing toxic jungle is filled with dangerous spores that are lethal if breathed. It is also home to giant insects. And our titular character, Nausicaa, the princess of the Valley of the Wind, explores the jungle and uses unexplained abilities to communicate with the insects. And so we see some scenes in the movie where she uses the flare bombs and this tool with a siren in it, which she uses to calm down the insects, to surprise them and calm down. And she is determined to find a way for the insects and humans to coexist. This is her main mission. On the other side, these are the Ptolemaians, is a military state, seizes the embryo of a giant warrior. One of the living weapons destroyed the earth a millennia. So these giant warriors are the equivalent to the nuclear bombs. And in the opening, we see them just burning up the world and walking through cities. This is in the opening title, while the titles are running. And she has found one of them. And they basically did all that and perished. Their mission was to destroy all civilization. And once the mission was finished, they perished. And she found one of them dormant. It had not perished. So she is on the mission to revive it. And she will do anything to do that. So the Ptolemaians conquer Nausicaa's home, killing her father, subjugating her people, hoping to unite the world under one rule and destroy the toxic jungle with the giant warriors. And thematically, this is happening because of two things: fear and ignorance. They have the fear of the toxic jungle, they have the fear of the giant insects, and they have the ignorance about the living jungle underground, which Nausicaa finds. And because they are ignorant about that, they are not realizing that this toxic jungle is actually purifying the earth, the devastated earth, and it will take it at the rate that it is happening, it will take it about 1,000 years to do that. And she is not ready to wait that long. She's saying it has to happen now. We have to cleanse the toxic jungle right now. Without realizing that the toxic jungle is toxic because it is consuming all the toxins from the atmosphere, and underneath it, the whole purification is happening, which she is ignorant about. And this is one of the themes in the movie, that fear and ignorance leads to war. Okay. This is the other community. These are called Pajait. The people of Pajait, another neighboring city-state, have vowed to crush the Tolmekians inside Nausicaa's home. But in the process, they will also destroy Tolmekians' occupied land, which they are not realizing. And the Pajait are the people who lure the insects in by kidnapping a baby insect.
Yes. And they had giant warrior first. Huh? They found
what?
a giant warrior, dormant one. Then Tolmekians went there and stole it.
Yes. So but they didn't want to revive it. The Pajait didn't want to revive it. The Pajait wanted to keep it dormant. Tolmekian spies found out that they have a dormant giant, and they basically, when the Tolmekian spaceships are introduced in the movie, they are in the process of kidnapping the Pajait princess and the giant and escaping. So they have destroyed, this has happened off screen, they have destroyed the Pajait city. And the Pajait are running after them, trying to capture this thing and destroy the giant and rescue their princess. This is where the story is happening. And when that fails, and they see that the giant is being revived, they steal their reaction is that we are going to steal one of the Om babies and get the Om to attack the valley, and in the process destroy everything. So this is, everybody is basically coming from the place of ignorance. They don't know what consequences are going to happen to these actions that they are taking. Okay, and in the midst of all this, Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind is caught up. So this is happening, the Om are attacking, and our dear princess Kushana has revived the giant. She's trying to use the giant to destroy the Om army or Om insects who are stampeding. The whole mission fails. The giant, halfway through its mission, dies.
The giant, like it's in Japanese drawing, like it is Akira, there is Godzilla, it's
Yes.
the same kind of,
Yeah, so
like
it's
a mutation from atomic bombing kind of.
it might be more of a kaiju. You know what is a kaiju? A kaiju is a giant monster in Japanese.
A traditional.
Yes. So kaiju is like Godzilla is a kaiju.
Okay.
You know?
I think Godzilla was kind of inspired by atomic mutation.
Yes. But so it all connects. All the stories where there are such disfigured, out of proportions, are conceived as a result of the atomic bombing, because that's their, it's part of their culture. It's something that nobody can escape from if you are a part of Japanese culture. So a kaiju is basically, when you read how kaijus are formed, they are basically mutations of Godzilla is a lizard. Its enemies are either moths or some flying or non-flying insects, which have become. I don't remember the exact names of the insects. One was Mothara. One was it's been a while I've seen a Godzilla movie. Anyway, so this mutant comes on. He tries to exhibit his power. In the process, gets destroyed. The Om army is not stopped, and the only way the Om army gets stopped is because Nausicaa rescues the baby Om and presents the baby Om to the Oms, but they are so mad with rage that they trample her and she dies, and that is her sacrifice for the cause. So if she's dead there, and then they revive her in whatever fashion you want to call. So she could be a revival in the form of Buddha, of Prince Gautam going into the jungle and coming back as Buddha, enlightened and coming back as Buddha, or different religions perceive it in their own. So it could be the revival of Jesus Christ. It could be conceived as. So the idea is that she dies and then she is spiritually revived. Her spirit is brought back into her body and she's revived.
We discussed with Alexander just before, and he found that this image inspired something in Matrix, whatever. I don't remember Matrix.
Absolutely. Matrix has such imagery, yeah, with the pipes and whatnot. And then the conclusion is that the Pajait stay back to try and revive the land. The Ptolemaians go back, and because Pajait country is destroyed, so they stay back in the valley to revive them. The Ptolemaians go back, and the people of the Valley of the Wind are left alone to revive themselves from all the destruction that has happened during this war. And they go back to their peaceful ways in association and coexisting with the surrounding environment and thriving. This is one of the important quotes in the movie. The toxic jungle is killing you, yet you try to live in harmony with it, is something that Kushana says during her exchange with the prisoners. And Lord Yupa, or one of the villagers, says, too much fire gives birth to nothing. So one of the themes is that we see these people coexisting with the dangerous, the poisonous jungle, is that they always use small amount of fire and control the spores that come into their valley by using very little fire. So small measures. And they have managed to keep it at bay with the forest from the spores to come into the valley.
They're protected.
They are protected by the forest.
The only one, by the wind.
By the wind. So the wind flows inland, so the spores don't come. Secondly, there is a forest at the end of their kingdom, which is a living forest, which eventually there's a scene in which they see it getting infected. So they go. There's a scene where they go into the forest and burn those spores so that the forest is saved. And one of the things that Kushana's people do is they start destroying the forest so that the valley gets destroyed. So they have to revive that forest again. The toxic forest is still there. It will take 1,000 years for it to clean up Earth's environment. And
destroying the forest, I don't know why. It reminds me of something. That's what.
there are too many. I mean, it's too much information. And all this he wrote over 10, 12 years. So there's just so much information. And so this is what he says, that this is like a statement of a stitch in time saves 9. That if you recognize what is happening and stop it at an early stage when it's smaller, then you don't have to blow up an atomic bomb at some stage to try and, which will kill all sides. So this is the theme of the underlying theme of the story.